Don't you understand English, or are you just dumb? Richard Blackwell's voice echoed by the elegant Blackwell and Associate lobby, high enough for all employees to hear as he pointed to a small spot on the Italian marble floor. Carmen Valdez, 45, held the mop firmly and kept his eyes low. After 3 years cleaning that law firm, he never imagined that a simple splash of coffee would become the catalyst of his greatest public humiliation. 3 years working here and has not yet learned to do the work right, Richard continued, adjusting the $3,000 suit while the other lawyers passed the hallway, some stopping to watch the show. Maybe it's time to find someone else, competent for this position. Chicago's most prestigious law firm seethed with the typical energy of a Monday morning. Important executives discussed millionaire cases in low voices, trainees ran with piles of documents, and the imported coffee aroma hovered in the air, conditioned air. For those watching from the outside, Carmen was just another invisible piece in the gear of that corporate world. Carmen took a deep breath, his calloused fingers by squeezing the mop cable. What those men of tender did not know was that she understood every word, every insult, every cruel joke murmured when they thought she was not listening. For 3 years he had kept a perfect staging, letting them underestimate it completely. "I'm sorry, Senor Blackwell," she answered, deliberately broken, maintaining the performance she had perfected over the years. "I clean better, I promise." Richard laughed with contempt, turning to his partner Davidson. "See just? This is the problem with these people. They come here without qualification, without education, hoping we do charity. My grandmother was right when she said that each one should know their place in society." The other employees lowered their eyes, some clearly uncomfortable with public cruelty, but none daring to intervene. After all, Richard Blackwell was not just a firm partner. He was the founder's son, and known for firing anyone who questioned his decisions. "Do you know how many resumes I have on my desk of qualified people wanting to work here?" Richard continued, his voice gaining an even more poisonous tone. "People who really deserve an opportunity, not like this." What Richard didn't realize was the almost imperceptible shine in Carmen's eyes. Not tears, but something much more dangerous. For years she had collected every compromising conversation, every confidential document left on the tables, every secret whispered at those corridors after the work. As he wrapped the cloth on the floor, Carmen smiled internally by remembering the folder hidden in his closet. 3 years of carefully documented evidence, discreet recordings made with a tiny tape hidden in the cleaning cart, and photographs that would reveal the true nature of that respectable company and the illegal practices that kept their stratospheric profits. "Clean properly this time, or Monday look for another job," growled Richard, walking toward the elevator. "And the next time someone recommend hiring these people, I'll remember exactly why our company has standards." Carmen nodded submissively, but his eyes followed each movement of him. Because what the arrogant Richard Blackwell had no idea was that, in his calloused hands of immigrant cleaning lady, was the power to destroy not only his career, but all the reputation he had built on lies, documentary fraud, and institutionalized prejudice. While everyone saw her like just another invisible woman by cleaning the corners of her privileged world, Carmen kept a secret that would turn that humiliation into the first act of a revenge that none of them would ever forget. There, in the face of all the eyes of contempt, he remained firm as one who holds too powerful secret to be revealed before the right time. Because sometimes the best revenge is to allow your enemies to completely underestimate the size of the hurricane that is about to devastate their perfect lives. If this story of prejudice and revenge touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple cleaning lady would become the nightmare of those who dared to underestimate the power of someone who had absolutely nothing to lose. The office was sealing with the latest preparations for the meeting with Japanese investors, the $50 million contract that could define the future of the firm. Carmen discreetly pushed his cart through the corridors, invisible as always, but his ears captured every detail of the urgent conversations. "Davidson, you checked the Yamamoto contract documents?" Richard Gr. It was in her room, nervously as she had never seen him. "We can't have any errors with these customers." 3 years watching that man had taught her that her arrogance grew proportionally to her nervousness, and today he was particularly cruel. "Carmen!" he shouted, making her stop in the corridor. "What a drug you are doing there. Go clean the meeting room and touch nothing on the tables, nothing. People like you are unable to distinguish trash from important document." The trainees dropped their eyes, embarrassed by public brutality. Sarah, the new receptionist, murmured something about not necessary to talk like that, but quickly fell silent when Richard shot her with her eyes. "Is there anything to say, Sarah?" he growled him. "Because you have, you can look for another job with her." The tension in the air was palpable. Employees who previously pretended not to see the constant humiliations now seemed genuinely uncomfortable with Richard's cruelty. Some exchanged faces of disapproval, Others whispered comments when they thought he was not listening. Carmen nodded submissively and headed toward the meeting room, but not before noticing something interesting. Richard had left his folder open on the table, full of confidential documents. Documents that showed exactly how the firm manipulated international contracts through sub-spray and offshore accounts. During lunch, when the office emptied, Carmen implemented a routine he had perfected over the months. First, it verified if all security cameras were in their usual angles. Then he discreetly activated the small digital recorder hidden for months in the vessel of Richard's room plants. That afternoon, his patience was rewarded in an extraordinary way. A telephone conversation where Richard instructed an accountant on how to hide $2 million in Asian contract taxes was captured in full. "Listen well, Martinez," said Richard on the phone, believing he is completely alone. "These Japanese will never check the numbers in detail. Use the same strategy last time. Acting 40% and sends the rest to the Cayman Islands. Just don't leave obvious tracks that can compromise our operation." Carmen almost smiled while organizing the cleaning products. For 3 years, he had witnessed dozens of these compromising conversations, but never something so explicitly incriminating. Her fingers discreetly touched the small hidden device on the apron, a second recorder that her nephew Marcus, a student of investigative journalism, had achieved for her. "And one more thing," Richard continued, now walking around the room with arrogant resourcefulness. "If someone comes asking questions about irregularities, you don't know me personally. These federal agencies have been very boring lately, especially after that scandal with the firm Peterson." What Richard didn't know was that Carmen had systematically not only documented his compromising telephone conversations, but also photographed confidential documents, copied emails left open on computers during night cleaning, and even recorded the prejudiced games and discriminatory comments he made about Latin and black employees at corporate parties of the company. Its methodology was precise as that of an experienced researcher. Every evidence was dated, categorized, and stored in multiple digital copies. Marcus had taught him about metadata and how to preserve the integrity of recordings for future legal use. "You know these people come here just to get our food for free and our jobs," Richard had said at the past holiday party, drinking French champagne while mocking the Latin employees. "But at least they are for the work that real Americans don't want to do." When he finally hung up the phone that afternoon, he found Carmen cleaning the windows innocently, humming a song in Spanish. "Did you understand anything what I said?" he asked with the usual contempt. "In the English understanding very well, senor," she replied, keeping her forced accent that had become her greatest protection. "Just clean window to look pretty." Richard laughed with growing cruelty. "That's exactly why people like you never get out of the place where they were born. Lack of ambition, lack of intelligence, lack of anything that really matters in this country." What he did not realize was that Carmen had spent the last 6 months secretly studying tax law and immigration legislation in the public library, learning exactly which crimes Richard was committing and how to properly document them to the competent federal authorities. That night in his small apartment, Carmen organized careful and one more piece of the puzzle that was setting meticulously 3 years ago. At the kitchen table, evidence piles accumulated in an organized manner, compromising email prints, confidential document photographs, detailed conversation transcripts, and now the most incriminating recording of all. His nephew Marcus had explained to him in detail about the complainant's protection law, which could not only legally protect her from retaliation, but also to ensure a substantial financial reward if her complaints resulted in significant fines against the company. "Aunt Carmen," he had said during one of his secret visits, "you have enough material here to knock down not only Richard, but potentially the whole corrupt structure of this firm. This may be worth millions in federal fines." Each new humiliation only strengthened something within her that those privileged men could not see. A silent determination being fed by their own arrogance they tried to use to break it. What these people did not know was that every act of contempt was meticulously writing their own sentence of defeat, document by document, recording by recording, evidence for irrefutable evidence. For the next 3 weeks, Carmen implemented his final strategy with the accuracy of a surgeon. Her morning routine began to include a strategic stop at the public library, where Marcus had reserved a computer for her to access corporate emails through open accounts at the office terminals. "Aunt, this is pure gold," Marcus whispered, examining the last evidence she had collected. "Counterfeit documents, international subfathering, documented discrimination. You have enough material to overthrow the whole firm." Carmen nodded, meticulously organizing each piece of evidence in encrypted digital folders. Her nephew had taught her about digital safety and cloud backup, knowledge she absorbed with the dedication of those who finally found her weapon of war. Marcus revealed to have technical training in investigative journalism and digital resources, that Carmen never imagined existing. For months he had researched Blackwell and Associates, discovering a network of suspicious connections with local politicians and judges, who explained how the firm always escaped investigations. "See this, Aunt," said Marcus, showing a complex chart on the computer screen. "In the last 5 years, the firm has defended 15 cases of money laundering and has earned every one. The statistical success rate for this type of case is only 30%. Something doesn't hit." On Thursday morning, something extraordinary happened. Sarah, the receptionist who had tried to defend her weeks ago, sought Carmen discreetly in the women's bathroom during the break. "Carmen, I need to tell you something important," said Sarah, checking if they were alone. "I know you understand English much better than it demonstrates." Carmen stared at her in silence, assessing whether she could trust that 24-year-old who seemed genuinely different from other employees. "Listen," continued Sarah, lowering his voice even more. "I work at the reception for 6 months and I know exactly the kind of person Richard is. I heard his terrible conversations about Latin and black employees. I have recordings on my cell phone. It was the first time in 3 years that someone in that office offered Carmen genuine alliance." Sarah revealed to systematically documented Richard's discriminatory comments, initially to protect herself from possible bullying, but now willing to help in the struggle for justice. "He fired 3 Latin employees last year with manufactured excuses," continued Sarah, "and always comments on how these people should not have access to the same jobs as qualified Americans. I have everything recorded because I thought one day I could need to defend me." Sarah revealed to have privileged access to the company's systems due to her position at the reception. She had collected additional evidence that perfectly complemented Carmen's dossier: discriminatory internal emails, memorandum on questionable hiring practices, and even recording of meetings where Richard made prejudiced jokes about employees. Carmen realized that he had underestimated the number of people who secretly disregarded Richard's behavior. Sarah became her internal informant, passing information on important meetings and confidential documents that would be discarded. "There's more," Sarah whispered during a second secret meeting. "I heard Richard talking to Davidson about a contract with a facade company in Miami. Something about cleaning money from Colombians using ghost consulting contracts." On Friday, while clearing the office APRs the work, Carmen implemented the riskiest phase of his plan. Using a technique that Marcus had taught him, he was able to access Richard's personal computer through a password that had memorized months ago, the date of birth of his dog, which he had mentioned several times on the phone. There he discovered something that exceeded his most optimistic expectations: detailed emails coordinating a money laundering scheme through ghost contracts with offshore companies. Richard not only evaded taxes, was actively laundering money from clients with questionable origins, including drug cartels. "My God," Carmen murmured in perfect Spanish, quickly photographing the most compromising emails. 3 years of humiliation had resulted in the discovery of federal crimes that could result in decades of prison to Richard. Emails revealed a sophisticated operation. Money of criminal origin was washed through fictitious legal advisory contracts, undergoing accounts on the Cayman Islands, and returned to the United States as legitimate profits for international attorney services. During the weekend, Carmen and Marcus worked intensely organizing a full dossier that seemed out of a suspense movie. They had evidence of systematic discrimination, tax fraud, money laundering, and multiple violations of labor laws and civil rights. "Aunt, this is not just a dismissal for just cause," Marcus explained, admiring the meticulous organization of the material. "This is enough for federal criminal proceedings, fines of millions of dollars, and jail. Richard has destroyed his own life underestimating you." Marcus had established contacts with investigative journalists from Chicago Tribune and FBI agents specializing in financial crimes. The plan was to coordinate the dissemination of evidence simultaneously with multiple agencies, ensuring that Richard did not have time to destroy evidence or escape the country. "We have to do this at once," Marcus explained, showing a detailed schedule. "Monday morning you deliver the evidence to the FBI. At 2 in the afternoon, journalists publish the first report. At 4, the IRS knocks on the door of the firm. The following Monday, Carmen arrived at work carrying a discreet folder and an inner smile that no one could play. Simultaneous meetings had scheduled with the IRS, the Justice Department, and 3 different investigative journalists for that afternoon. Richard greeted her with the usual contempt, adjusting the Italian suit that would soon be exchanged for a prison uniform. "Hoping that today you can clean without breaking anything, Carmen." "Of course, Senor Blackwell," she replied, keeping the staging until the end. "Today will be very special for cleaning." What Richard didn't realize was that Carmen had chosen his words with surgical accuracy. because in a few hours she would really do the most complete and definitive cleaning of her career, removing the moral and criminal dirt that had contaminated that office for years. While Richard was confident to his meeting with Japanese investors, the contract he considered his greatest professional victory, Carmen prepared to execute a justice that would turn that day the worst defeat of his life, so devastating that years later he would still try to understand how a simple immigrant cleaning lady managed to completely dismantle the empire he believed to have built on solid bases of complete privilege and impunity. At 2 in the afternoon, while Richard confidently had the $50 million contract to Japanese investors, Carmen personally delivered an 847 pages at the FBI office in Chicago. Special Agent Rodriguez quickly leafed the evidence, his eyes widening each page. "My Our Lady," the agent murmured, examining the photographs of compromising emails. "This is international money laundering on an industrial scale. How long did you collect this evidence?" 3 years, senor," answered Carmen, finally abandoning his forced accent. 3 years documenting each crime, every humiliation, every act of systemic discrimination. At 3:15, Richard still smiled at the Japanese executives when his cell phone vibrated insistently. A call from the receptionist, then another of partner Davidson, and finally a third of his accountant Martinez, all ignored because nothing could be more important than closing that contract. "Señores Yamamoto," said Richard, adjusting the Italian suit, "this contract represents not only a commercial partnership, but a symbol of mutual trust between our cultures." What he didn't know was that at that very moment federal agents were searching his office, confiscating computers and seizing documents that Carmen had carefully signaled in his detailed mapping. At 3:45, the first blow came through Sarah, who managed to go through federal security using his employee identification. "Richard," she said, entering the meeting room with a mix of terror and satisfaction, "you need to see it now." Richard shot her with his eyes furiously at the interruption. "Sarah, I'm in a very important meeting. Whatever can be you to expect. The FBI is in the office," she whispered, discreetly showing the phone with photos of agents reviewing her table. "And there are reporters from Chicago Tribune at the reception." The blood completely drained Richard's face. The Japanese executives exchanged concerned looks, clearly realizing that something was terribly wrong. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Richard stamped, getting up abruptly. "I need to solve a administrative misunderstanding." But when he arrived at the main lobby, he found a scenario that surpassed his worst nightmares. Federal agents carried document boxes while journalists photographed everything. And at the center of that chaos, like a statue of justice, it was Carmen, no longer curved over a mop, but upright, worthy, talking fluently with reporters. "For 3 years, she told cameras, her firm and clear voice, I systematically document racial discrimination, fiscal fraud, and money laundering in this company. I have recordings, photographs, emails, and enough evidence for federal criminal proceedings." Richard staggered, leaning on the wall. "Carmen, you speak English perfectly?" She turned to him with a smile that mixed years of humiliation with the sweet flavor of revenge. "I have a master's degree in business administration from the University of Bogota and 15 years of experience in financial audit. I came to the United States running away from violence, but I ended up finding another kind of crime, that of men like you." The cameras captured the exact moment when Richard Blackwell understood the magnitude of their destruction. The woman he had humiliated for 3 years was not an unhappy immigrant cleaning lady. He was a highly qualified professional who had methodically infiltrated his criminal operation. For 3 years, every insult, every discriminatory comment, every document you left by chance about the tables has been carefully documented. "You underestimated me because you believed in your own prejudices." The Japanese executives, who had descended to understand the commotion, witnessed Richard being handcuffed while Agent Rodriguez read his constitutional rights. "Richard Blackwell, you are arrested for money laundering, fiscal fraud, tax evasion, and infringement of multiple federal laws. Anything you say can and will be used against you." Sarah approached Carmen, tears in her eyes. "You did it for all of us who were too small to react." Carmen nodded, noting Richard being driven towards the federal police car. "The best revenge is not to destroy those who harm us. It is to reveal exactly who they have always been under the respectable surface." While the sirens walked away, taking Richard to a federal cell where their Italian suit would be exchanged for an orange uniform, Carmen remained in the lobby, surrounded by reporters and colleagues who finally saw her for what she had always been. Not a victim, but a strategist who had orchestrated one of the most elegant and devastating revenge that Chicago has already witnessed. 6 months later, Carmen Valdez was sitting on her new table at the FBI office analyzing a corporate fraud when her phone rang. Sarah, now promoted to operations supervisor in a competing firm, called on news that would make her smile. "Carmen, You need to see today's headlines. Former elite lawyer works as a janitor in the federal prison. It's Richard cleaning the restrooms of the penitentiary, where she fulfills 15 years for money laundering. Carmen laughed, remembering the poetic irony of the situation. The man who had moved his work as a cleaning lady now discovered in practice the value and dignity of this profession, even through very different circumstances. The reward of $2.5 million he received as a complainant had allowed not only to start his life, but also to create the Carmen Valdez Foundation for Qualified Immigrants in situations of professional vulnerability. In just 6 months, they had already helped 847 immigrant professionals validate their diplomas and find decent jobs. "Do you know what makes me happy most?" Carmen told Sarah during a call. "It's not seeing Richard paying for their crimes. It's seeing how many people like me now have real opportunities to show their value without having to hide." Marcus, who had become an investigative journalist after graduating, published regularly reports on discrimination in the corporative environment. His first major article about the Richard Blackwell case won a National Journalism Award and opened doors for similar investigations in other companies. "Aunt, you have turned a terrible experience into systematic change," he said during Sunday lunch. The legislation being voted in Congress on protection of immigrant complaints has its name attached not officially. The Blackwell and Associate office was purchased by a civil rights law firm that maintained all employees, except those involved in criminal practices. Davidson, Richard's partner, cooperated with investigations in exchange for penalty reduction, serving only 2 years in house arrest. During a conference on corporate justice, Carmen was invited as the main speaker. His presentation, "When Invisibility Becomes Superpower," was assisted by more than 10,000 people online and became viral on social networks. "For 3 years, they saw me like an unhappy immigrant cleaning lady," she told the attentive audience. "But I always knew who it was. The problem was not my identity, it was their inability to see beyond their prejudice." Carmen's story has inspired documentaries, books, and even a Hollywood film proposal, but she preferred to focus on the real work of social change through her foundation. Richard, in his few prison interviews, publicly admitted that he had completely underestimated Carmen and that his prejudices were his own ruin. "I created my own fall to belongs to someone based only on appearance and origin," confessed to the reporter. During a visit to the old company, now transformed into a law firm aimed at social justice, Carmen found a sign at the reception. "In memory of all qualified professionals forced to accept work below their capabilities due to systemic prejudice. The best revenge," Carmen said in his last television interview, "it was not destroying Richard Blackwell. It was to build something bigger than he could never imagine. A system where people like me don't have to hide to survive." Sarah, who now driving corporate diversity programs, always ended her presentations with a quote from Carmen. "True strength is not reacting to prejudice with anger, but to turn it into fuel for changes that benefit the whole society." 3 years later, Carmen looked through her FBI office window, watching young immigrants entering university with scholarships for her foundation. Richard tried to humiliate her but ended up creating one of the most powerful defenders of the rights of qualified immigrants in the country. She has learned that true revenge is not to return the damage suffered. It is to achieve success that her enemies could never imagine, turning her pain into hope for thousands of people who face the same injustices. If you have already faced prejudice or discrimination at work, leave it in the comments as you reacted. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that sometimes those who try to diminish us be the architect of our greatest victory.